So, welcome to Feature Fridays, and my name is Guy Bartram, and today, again, I'm joined by Jorg. So, Jorg, for those who missed all the previous episodes, do you want to just introduce yourself again?
Yeah, I'm Jörg Lehr. I work as a technical product manager in VMware's cloud provider business unit.
Great, thanks. And for those who don't know me, Guy Bartram, I'm Product Marketing Manager for the Cloud Director Suite. And today we're going to talk about, less of a demo side today, but we're really going to talk about DeveLeady Cloud. And we've covered in the previous videos and a lot of the core capabilities that are now available with Cloud Director, such as Terraform Provider to be able to do infrastructure as code, container service extension to be able to provide Kubernetes clusters to your tenants. We talked about and showed the app launchpad, which is a great way of delivering applications to tenants in a simple to consume manner where they don't have to know about the underlying infrastructure. We also talked about that with Bitnami in context of bringing all those free applications into your environment and then being able to extend those with third-party applications as well. So today we're going to kind of focus a little bit on, there's a lot of stuff here and we want to kind of condense it down into what is the offering that you could start looking at, what is the journey you're going to go through to getting to a kind of DevReady Cloud. But I think probably first, Jorg, let's start with a definition of DevReady Cloud. What do you see DevReady Cloud as being for an offering for cloud providers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so DeveloperReady Cloud means that as a service provider, you want to offer services and components that application developer persona could consume in a very easy way within their tenant constructs and org VDCs in Cloud Director. So the idea is to have not only pure operating system images or empty VM shells in your library and things like more the infrastructure as a service part that always has been the core components of Cloud Director, where then the tenant users, all kinds of tenant users, can deploy these VMs, but they are responsible to install the operating system and any application or platform components that they want to have, database, web server, whatever. But we want to level that up, and as a service provider with the DeveloperReady Cloud, you want to offer more and already some easy to consume, Kubernetes clusters, for example. With the Bitnami catalog, you can offer a lot of platform components, database images in the catalog that a tenant user can consume, and they directly get ready to be able to develop their application. So it's more focusing on additional value on top of infrastructure as a service that helps the tenant user to just get started with their application development.
So if I'm looking at a developer with a CI/CD pipeline that they're going through for their code development, aspects of that pipeline then can be fulfilled with tooling that a service provider can provide directly to the developer.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the typical CI/CD pipeline, there are typically a lot of different environments. You have some developer environment where that is located pretty close to the developer, just for the short iterations that you have there. When using Kubernetes or Docker, it's mainly perhaps already running on the PC or the development station, that laptop the developer sits on. But whenever it comes to integration testing and then eventually, of course, run all that stuff, the application in production, that's where you obviously don't do that on a developer PC. So that's where the CI/CD pipeline comes in to automate transition over the code from the developer environment into some test environment, and then perhaps do some automated functional testing and user acceptance testings around that, and then publish that into production environment. And that is where all the automation and the cloud provider resources come in, because that's where with Cloud Director you have the Cloud Director APIs, and then these endpoints, like we spoke about the Terraform and infrastructure as a code principle that you can use to describe the test environment and even the production environment for that application. And then during the execution of the pipeline to get these deployment process up and running, the thing to create the infrastructure for that test environment can be fully automated and runs then in the org VDC that developer or the end customer gets from the cloud provider.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff typically today is, like you say, it's either done on developer laptops, but when a lot of offerings today are using sort of public cloud repositories for check-in, check-out code, public cloud like JRun, for example, for testing, and even public clouds, Kubernetes, and functionless environments to deploy code straight into. So this really brings then all of that capability with some of the Bitnami applications you could provide, for example, private test repositories, etc., into a VMware cloud. So you're getting all of the goodness of the VMware security, the capabilities that VMware provides, and all of that application requirement that you have for the net new application you're developing right here, rather than somewhere you don't know where it's running.
Yeah, and very important to understand for these environments and the applications. In a lot of cases, they have to talk to some existing systems that you might already have in the environment. And that is something where, especially when you look at the infrastructure as a service offerings from Cloud Director, where the solutions are very strong because it allows you to have these developer-ready solutions like the container service extension to deploy the application platform into an existing org VDC and connecting and using all the network automation that Cloud Director provides to connect the new things to existing infrastructure components, like an existing, database that already is running in the org VDC.
That's a really good point, actually. So for those cloud providers who are watching this out there, then this is a really good opportunity for you to talk to your customers about, you've already got the data gravity, you've already got the application gravity inside your environment. They want this net new kind of development environment so they can take advantage of maybe some IoT solutions or whatever the application is they're developing, but that doesn't necessitate it to be outside of the environment anymore. Whereas before it pretty much was, it had to be. Now we've got this ability to bring it in-house. And like you said at the start, the developers aren't going off and using their own tooling, which you have no control on. You're actually providing those guardrails saying, this is the development environment, this is what you're allowed to kind of develop on. And previously where you're using public resources, I can now provide you those same resources in-house, secure, tested environment for you to do your development.
Yeah, and combine them with all the especially the network and security automation that happens with Cloud Director out of the box. So developer user would not have to pick or create their own, firewall as a front end or a load balancer front end. They can just use the functionality that comes with the NSX integration in Cloud Director, where for their org VDC and their org networks, they can define different networks. They can even define different vApp networks if they want to, and connect the different networks using the NSX edges that you can self-service deploy through Cloud Director. And with that, on these edges, you can define a lot of additional services like very fine-grained firewall rules, load balancer capabilities, and all that stuff that already just is there out of the box in the Cloud Director tenant portal, which makes it very easy for the tenant developer user to then focus on their app development rather than trying to figure out, well, what's the best load balancer for my solution, and then you have to set up that infrastructure piece and connect it properly. So that all comes out of the box with the Cloud Director sort of core functionality.
And I guess when you're looking at, this is more of a sort of question really, when you're looking at the way that an organization is, you have your IT department, you have your kind of development environments for your internal developers. Now, what we're doing here is we're saying, right, well, your IT department, your infrastructure running is in a cloud, a VMware Cloud Director Managed Cloud. So you have an org VDC, perhaps many. Are you then going to say as an IT admin of that cloud that I'm going to give you perhaps your own org VDC for development environment? Or would you say that you could potentially offer the ability for the developer to spin up their own org VDC and, like say, create your own networking gateways, do that all via the Terraform provider? Would that be, what would be the kind of the best practice that you would sort of think from the capabilities that we have today?
Yeah, so that is something we already see a lot of end customers doing, and providers offering. Since for the org VDC, we have a lot of flexibility in terms of allocation model, SLAs, and things like that, that of course eventually reflect down to the price for these resources. And it makes sense to create different environments and different org VDCs for development environment, for test environment, and production environment, because the characteristics and the requirements differ. For a development environment, you typically need some resources that don't need to be super duper resilient, because well, it's development, so typically the things in there live for a very short time. For a test environment, you want to get very close to your production environment from a layout and architecture perspective, to avoid any issues because of different architecture when you deploy it to production. But still, well, it's a test environment, so typically the VMs there live just for these few hours or few days while one test run is going on, and then they are turned down. So you have a pretty high churn rate in these environments, while in your production environment, well, typically the stuff lives and runs in production, so a very longer time, you need resiliency and so on. So we can use the org VDC concept in Cloud Director to model these different requirements based on the different allocation models that we have, different SLAs, different, storage policies in background that help with, fast provisioning for the high churn rate during development and testing environment, things like that. And without losing any of the network connectivity. That's the big thing, because these org networks and the construct within the org network, they translate very good and then are very easy to sort of replicate in the different environments, so that you have the same architecture, the same network architectures. And we can use the cross org VDC networking to even connect these different networks if that's needed. So even if during a development environment, you need to access, for example, some identity management that is the same single identity management over all these different platforms. That's absolutely something where you can use the networking connections in Cloud Director to connect all the different environments and to this single identity management, or name server, Git repository. These are typically components that are sort of shared over the different org VDCs.
Got it. And could you, so that the org VDC as a construct is quite a large, very capable construct in Cloud Director. What about taking it down to like a vApp? Is that equally going to provide you the same level of functionality, or would you say that it's probably better at the org VDC rather than at the vApp standpoint?
So with the org VDC, you have the settings for the different allocation models and the infrastructure settings. The vApp construct is very powerful because that really encapsulates either a single application or a single set of virtual machines, technically. That would be your entity of deployment between these different environments. And since the vApp can be connected to org networks, depending on the network level that you have and functionality that you have, you can create even in-app networks if you want to go down to that level. But the thing is that the vApps can be very easily published back or put back into a Cloud Director catalog, and then you can share these catalogs. So that would be a nice mechanism to share the infrastructure pieces between the different organizations by having a shared catalog. And then you use sort of one development environment where you define the vApp, put it back in the catalog, and then deploy the infrastructure pieces into the different other org VDCs, and using the catalog mechanism, the library in Cloud Director, as placement for the infrastructure, the operating system templates, for example, and the vApp network configuration and the VM network configuration, and then use the other tools like the GitLab or Bitnami images inside these VMs and vApps for the application platform that runs inside the VMs.
Got it. So it sounds to me that I'm trying to look at it from a service provider's point of view and a tenant's point of view. If you're the tenant and having multiple orgs with multiple gateways and networks to manage, it's probably going to become quite a difficult operation to manage as that scales out. 3 or 4 or 5 is not a problem at all. When you're getting to 50 or 60, it's going to be a bit of a headache. And you can automate a lot of that as well, but I think it's also a bit of a headache for a provider to have tons of orgs that they're charging different rates for or whatever.
Yeah.
So in that respect, it's probably better to bring the orgs down to a minimum and use the vApp constructs that are available.
Yeah, so you would use the orgs, let's say, for the different stages of your CI/CD pipeline, like one org for development and then one org for testing, one org for production. And within the orgs, you then have the different apps or vApps that bundle the actual applications that you develop. So if you have 10 applications that are being developed in parallel, you would have 10 different vApps, but they are living in the same development org. For the development phase, use the same test org VDC for the testing and so on.
That's right. And then the service provider could get to put that on a different provider VDC with all the characteristics required for production in terms of speed and throughput, etc. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So there's, like we said at the beginning, there's quite a lot of things here. There's container service extension, there's App Launchpad, Bitnami, Terraform provider. Where would be given what we know now about the definition of a DevReady cloud and what in your experience is the kind of the provider kind of baseline best practices, how would you suggest that the offering kind of starts with a provider who perhaps, like most providers, do have some knowledge of development, whether that's internal development or development for customers? How would you recommend that they start entering into this world where perhaps DevReady Cloud is a whole different conversation for them compared to their kind of standard infrastructure plays?
Yeah, so the good thing is about when we talk about App Launchpad, CSE, and Terraform, from a provider perspective, they are very easy to set up. For Terraform, well, you don't have to do anything. The Terraform provider just talks against the working public APIs of Cloud Director. So, well, as a service provider, of course, we have seen the use cases where you can use Terraform to automate your own processes. But when we talk about DeveloperReady Cloud, well, you don't know. It could be that your tenants are already using the the tenant capabilities of the Terraform provider to automate their infrastructure. So for that's nothing where you have to do any specific setups. With App Launchpad and CSE, these are, of course, some components that you have to install. So you have to create the CSE server components. You have to install App Launchpad, but that's not a big challenge. That takes a bit of time. That's very easy because it fits very well in the existing architecture, and they integrate, of course, with UI and APIs into Cloud Director. So it's a one-time effort, but it's not too much effort to set these up, and you can do that even without the need for deep knowledge about the these higher level platforms. So when we talk about App Launchpad, for example, you can subscribe to the Bitnami app catalog or our cloud marketplace catalog, and let marketplace synchronize the images, these application images, into a Cloud Director catalog, and use App Launchpad to offer them to the tenants, so that tenant users can very easy through the tenant portal deploy these applications. Now, for you as a provider, the only thing that you have to set up for that is installing App Launchpad and creating these default configurations for the deployment for the different tenants and the org VDCs. But you don't need to know details about the applications, all these Bitnami images and the applications that run in there, because that's part of the Bitnami and the marketplace value proposition, well, because they have a good documentation of these individual images. And if it's a WordPress image, then you as a provider just provide the street where this Bitnami WordPress image comes from the cloud marketplace into the Cloud Director catalog, and then through App Launchpad can be easily consumed and deployed into the org VDC from the tenant. But you as a provider don't have to care about WordPress at all. That's all documented in the image documentation, and the end customer, of course, the developer, can use and go into the operating system and then use the WordPress installation without you as a provider have to interact there in any way.
All right. So you and equally from a cost perspective, right? You're not paying for each application. You're in the MSP contract for Bitnami. You're paying I think it's a one-time license fee that you pay, that enables you to have access to all of the applications. So you don't really kind of care what gets deployed. As long as you're deploying stuff, you're pulling through consumption on the platform, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the same is, it's a comparable model for the CSE Kubernetes extension as well, we have seen that when you tenant user uses CSE, they deploy the Kubernetes cluster into their org VDC. So from a provider perspective, it is a bunch of virtual machines with the master nodes and the worker nodes, some storage nodes in a vApp. But that's quite it. The tenant user gets access to the Kubernetes configuration, and then they use the Kubernetes ecosystem within that cluster. So you don't, as a provider, you don't need to be too deep into the Kubernetes details to get started. Of course, all of that can be used as a sort of a ramp for you as a provider to offer more managed services around that, because well, CSE, App Launchpad, and so on, that's also, of course, open to you as a provider to use. So you could create some special, let's say, a provider managed org VDC where you deploy Kubernetes clusters into as a provider, as a managed service, and then really offer just the Kubernetes cluster access to your tenant, and then you manage the cluster in sort of your managed org VDC as a provider, and go more into the managed service space for that area. And that, of course, needs you to, well, for the support and SLAs and so on, to know what's running in there. But it's a smooth transition from just being infrastructure and having the tenant care about the application for you to level up to some managed service offerings for these components as well.
So a baseline would be then that you could take your vCloud Director today, you could download the CSE plugin, the App Launchpad plugin. You could set up contract with Bitnami. With CSE, there's no contract, no nothing. You just go ahead and deploy it, and you could just provide these kind of as a service. You know, no management of the applications themselves, but you're just managing the support of the delivery of the applications. And then as a managed service, like you say, you could then start wrapping these in, reporting, additional services, the monitoring services, etc., to help customers. Or there's a third play, which is you could actually be the developer for the customer. Or and what we're seeing a lot of service providers do at the moment is they're outsourcing a lot of development opportunities to specialists. So the customer kind of, they're working with the customer. Customer wants this type of application created. They don't know how to do it. They don't have the skills in perhaps public cloud technologies or coding, or specific technologies related to coding. So they ask the service provider, and there's several I know who have bought small development houses, bought those in-house, but there's also several I know who are actually partnering with other kind of development organizations to deliver on their cloud using their tooling for the customer. So I think there's kind of nice avenues to explore here for service providers to get much more kind of depth in their portfolio, and that's in that offering space.
Yeah, that's something we also see from when discussions with service providers, and actually, well, we have a lot of enterprise customers as well, of course, that talk to our service provider partners. And in these discussions, very often, of course, all these new things around cloud native applications, cloud native architecture, Kubernetes, and things come up. But there's in a lot of cases, it's there's a lot of hype around these words, but even the end customers and their business lines of business that need a new application, well, they know about the word Kubernetes, but they don't have any deep skills on how to use that. They just heard about that it's good to have new applications built in a cloud native way, but they need some expertise either from a service provider partner or from a special app development company and specialist to build the application for them. And that's where, as you mentioned, the combination can be really powerful, where you either partner up with your developer departments that you have as a service provider, or partner up with some external entities to provide some really, let's say, turnkey development for your customers, so that they get all the application and the runtime environment during development, but also during production for this application, let's say, in one project, rather than having to ramp up their own skills and develop the application, just get the infrastructure from the provider, and then for production, they might have to reconcile, well, do I run that in-house from the provider and so on. So there's a lot of friction when they do that single-handed on their own. But if you as a provider can build them the full package, we get them, well, we build the application, we design that for you, we build it for you using all the images that we have and the components that we have on our platform. So you can very easily deploy that into the production Org VDC and you are up and running. That's a very nice way to, or a very powerful offering to enterprise end customers.
So I think, one of the, it's a question and a challenge really, is that the perception of a lot of customers is that these are things that only run in hyperscale cloud, and they need to have Azure or AWS or Google skills to be able to run and execute this type of workload. How different in your view is for me, I kind of look at this as it's the right tool for the job. Some applications are going to be best run in Azure versus AWS, as Google versus on-prem VCD. Where should or how should a service provider engage with that view a customer has? Like you said, they have a view around Kubernetes. They might not know why they've got a view around Kubernetes, but yeah, they know, hey, got to use Kubernetes. And you get customers who kind of lay down this law on this sort of thing, and they might say, we want it to run in Azure. I mean, it might be genuine reason for it, credits or whatever, or genuine reason for the technology specifically being used. How would you sort of position then the VMware solution that we've built today with all of these capabilities that we have with VCD, against or alongside that hyperscale capability, which has arguably a lot of investment every year, a ton of new products coming out all the time. How do you keep up with that? What would be your kind of view on that?
Yeah, so it's important to understand that when it comes to the all the different services that developer user would get from a hyperscaler, these are mainly components that they need in the application. They are obviously not the application logic on their own. So there is no hard requirement to build a certain application with a certain set of requirements based just on AWS services, for example. Most of these service endpoints, they are just open source components for, I don't know, a messaging service, a certain static SQL database, some NoSQL database, search engine, and things like that, that typically are open source components that you just want to use as the platform for your application logic, for your business logic. And that is something, when you go to a hyperscaler, you get all these things in a managed fashion from the hyperscaler, but you build the application and really based on this platform, and it's very hard to move that away because that would mean some code change.
Yeah.
Well, when we come in from a VMware stack perspective, where we offer with Cloud Director the infrastructure, and then the Bitnami and the marketplace offerings, they provide you the same open source components that an application developer can use as part of their application, or to sit there, put their application logic on top of that, but with the flexibility that you can, you still just work with the open source components. So the application that you build is much more sort of mobile and compatible to run in different places, run them in different Org VDCs when we talk about a provider perspective. But well, it's a vApp, so you could very easily, as an enterprise customer, develop and test in a cloud provider environment and still run the production environment in your on-prem vSphere environment, because, well, it's virtual machines as a sort of wrapping engine, a container for that. And that provides a very sort of powerful play compared to the application that is built really based on services that a single hyperscaler offers.
Yeah, I mean, when you boil it all down, it comes down to the basic container that is running, the runtime the container's on, whether it's Kubernetes or something else, or Docker, sorry, or something else, or you have the actual facilities you're using. So the API calls you're making to other platforms to push a bit of data, receive a bit of data, process a bit of data, something like that. And there is this perception then that those other platforms are only, third gen ICT solutions that you can get from Azure and AWS and places like that. But what we have now, arguably with Bitnami, is that a way to bring in machine learning, AI, all of that good stuff through the Bitnami catalog to the VMware Cloud. So it's quite unique in that respect. I think maybe the question then needs to start about where is the data gravity for this application. You know, if it's an application that doesn't rely on any existing data, something completely net new, then the possibility of running it anywhere is, you know, it's up for grabs. It depends what functionality you want. But immediately you see some sort of data gravity there, i.e. it's going to require data from your existing cloud where it's running today, or your on-prem environment where it's running today, then you're in a different conversation. Because once you start spanning applications across, you know, what undetermined distances, you know, and then you start looking at things like data and anonymity and tokenization and things like that, it gets extremely complicated very quickly what you want to do. So there's a lot of benefit in then bringing that back into house.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because a lot of even new applications that are being built right now in let's say an established enterprise environment, they don't stand on their own. It's different for startups, because with a startup you create your application from scratch, the whole company from scratch. But if it's an existing enterprise, they already have their products, they already have their existing IT systems, and any new application typically in some way has to integrate or talk to these existing applications. And well, these existing applications, they typically run either in a in-house vSphere environment or on a service provider, but also on a VMware platform. And when you build a new application integrating that needs to talk to existing environments, that's where our cloud provider partners have a big benefit, because, well, it's the same platform. So the VMs and vApps themselves can be pretty easily being moved around. And then we have our tools with H6, we have NSX VPNs, we have vCloud availability that allows you to connect your on-prem data center with the vSphere platform running on-prem with the org VDCs that you get from a cloud director. So the network connections and the way to allow a new application talk to existing infrastructure or other systems that you run in-house is typically much easier to solve than if you build an application that just runs on a hyperscaler, but then you somehow have to build some communication path back, and might be different than for production environments and so on. So
I think that's, I mean, you know, the reality of life is there's so much legacy out there that there's going to be legacy for years, and whilst we make these step movements to trying to get away from it, there's always a big ball and chain, and with very good reason, right? You know, the majority of revenue comes from all of these environments. So, but equally, then, you know, you're developing an application to be competitive, to generate more revenue, to make, I don't know, let's take social mobility for your sales force. You know, they want a mobile applications, they need mobility, they need application protection, they need VPNs, they need all this sort of stuff. And there is a tool set, Workspace ONE, that can provide that as well. But then developing against that, you may want to pull in some data analytics or whatever you're doing into the application, so you can then bring that from Bitnami down into the VMware Cloud and offer that to the developers. It makes for it's really quite a compelling conversation when you think about the potential here. I think some of the challenge really is talking to cloud providers who typically, what I've seen is lots of them have you know, developed their Azure practices, their AWS practices, and they've got their VMware practice. And there's multi-cloud, but there's no hybrid cloud. And what we clearly see a requirement from enterprises, they want hybrid cloud management and hybrid cloud capability precisely for that legacy reason, right?
Yeah, and that's also as a service provider, when you have a VMware practice, very likely the customers and the workloads that run on this VMware stack, on the Cloud Director stack, somehow relates, of course, to a VMware environment on-prem. So it is customers that know the technology, that have applications, they know the way to operate virtual machines on a VMware and a vSphere platform. And that is a big benefit, because then you already have these customer relationships with the IT departments of the enterprise customers and can collaborate with them to offer to the line of businesses where typically the application development for the business application is located, to offer them that comprehensive hybrid offering between services and infrastructure on-prem data center and the same technology stack that you as a service provider partner can offer them as a cloud offering for them to consume.
And I think that's a great way to wrap it up, actually, a great place to wrap it up, Jörg, in that, the position from our perspective has always been around a hybrid cloud capability, hybrid management, hybrid delivery. And the DevReady Cloud solution that we've got now, epitomizes this by piggybacking on this vSphere heritage that we've got. All of the good things, like you mentioned a few, around the connectivity options between on-prem and cloud, and equally now being able to pull all that stuff down into your cloud to provide a secure environment for your and predictable environment for your tenant applications to run, where you're not, going to be affected by other consumption on the same hosts. You got that, that certain certainty about which host your applications are running on, etc. So it makes a huge difference to you as a customer, and also the provider providing the service itself. Jörg, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again, and thanks a lot for providing all of your knowledge and expertise into this conversation.
Yeah, sure. See you next time.
Cheers.